So what we have just seen with the site.css override that just magically happened is actually something called shapes. It's actually driven by a subsystem in Orchard called shapes. So let's take a look at how shapes work, what shapes are, and why do we care about shapes, and why are shapes good for us. So let's go to the admin area for now, and let's enable something. And under modules, what we'll enable is shape tracing. Shape tracing will let us see shapes that are otherwise not visible to the naked eye. And once we have enabled shape tracing and reload the front end, we should be able to see this little toolbar or bar at the bottom. And if you open it up, we will get, well, the shape tracing feature, or shape tracing, well, explore mode. Now let's click somewhere, well, probably here on the Welcome to Orchard text. And if I make this a bit bigger, we will see some interesting stuff. So, what are shapes? And what do we see here? And why do we use shape tracing? Shapes are basically the building blocks of Orchard's layouts, or Orchard's layout. To be very precise, shapes are dynamic objects that serve as view models to pieces of the Orchard layout. So, for example, this piece here that I selected, the Welcome to Orchard text, is driven by a shape called parts_title, which comes from the title part that we have seen a while ago. And you can see that this parts_title shape is nested in other shapes. What we see here on the left is actually the tree of shapes of the layout. So, for example, if we go a level up to the content, to this shape displayed as content here, then we can see that this whole section here is selected in light blue, and the shape that displays this, or that drives this, is called content. And if you go one level up, we see that this will be a zone called content, which is driven by a zone shape. So it seems that shapes can be nested in each other. Shapes can contain other shapes, and they can contain multiple other shapes. But remember, the shapes here, the shapes behind these pieces of the layout are really like view models. So let's take a look at those view models a bit later. And now let's introduce another notion called shape templates, because what we actually see are the rendering of the shape templates. What Orchard does is that while there is this tree of dynamic view models, shapes here in the background, when you request the page, Orchard will actually bind all of these shape objects to a template. So, for example, for the parts_title shape, Orchard will take a look at all the template files and select the template that fits the best. In this case, we can see that the active template is this one. It's also a CS.html file. So again, a razor template that we have seen before. This is the template file. This is the HTML that actually displays this shape. So again, what's there? We have this tree of objects nested inside each other, this hierarchy of objects called shapes. And when Orchard displays a page, it will bind all of these shapes to templates. Well, actually, it will bind all of these shapes to some kind of HTML, in this case, rendering. Most of the time, or almost in all cases, the HTML rendering comes from templates.
but actually these renderings can also come from so-called shape methods from classes, but that's some advanced topic. But for now, what we have here is well, this tree of shapes and CSS/HTML templates. And the good thing is that since the template that actually renders that piece of the layout is selected by Orchard, that also means that we can somehow alter which template is selected. For example, one of the most powerful features of this layout engine of Orchard is that you can create so-called overrides. So if we are not satisfied with how something is displaying, like this title, we can create a file that will override the original template, and now that new file, the new shape template, that override will be used. And how can we use such overrides? Well, the shape tracing will help us here, because if we open this alternates section here, we will see that there are various overrides that we can use. Alternate in Orchard's terminology are basically variations for shape template overrides that you can use, because there are more than one. Well, our template file is called parse.title.cshtml. So if we put just a parse.title.cshtml into our own theme, like displayed here, then, well, we will override the shape template. But there's also more, because, for example, there is this title-9 CSHTML. What's that -9 here? That's actually the content item ID. So by using this first override, we can override how all of the title parts are displayed. By using the second file name, we can override just this specific display, just the title part of this specific content item. And finally, there is a third built-in alternate here with -page as the last part of the name. This will override if we create a file with this name, then this will override all the titles for all the page content items. So all the content items with the page content type. Now, we can just let shape tracing create the file, or we can be hardcore and create the CSHTML file from within Visual Studio. Let's do that. So I will create an override for just this page item here, because we want to override how this welcome to Orchard is displayed here. So let's go back to our Visual Studio project, and let's also go back to our Dojo course theme, where we have our empty views folder. If I right-click here and add, well, not view, because that will probably mess up our projects by adding some references that we don't want, but rather add new item. And well, we can select anything here. Let's select HTML page, and then use the name as parse.title -9, but I have copied from shape tracing. So I will just create this file. I will remove the default content and just add some text here. So let's add this is coming from an override. And again, I'm hitting Ctrl-Shift-S, not just to save this file, but also save the project file, because since we added this file, well, the project file was also changed. And if we go back now and hit refresh, Orchard dynamic compilation will again kick in the background. And what we should see is that
the rendering of this welcome to Orchard text changes. And indeed it changed. So now what we have, our template, takes precedence, and that is displayed here. But the issue is that now we have hidden the actual title, so that's not really useful. Well, we can override the title with a specific text, but probably that's not something that you want to use most of the times. So let's add back the original functionality too. Now, we have seen that our file, our original shape template was parts.title.cshtml. So if I open this menu with Control comma and just hit parts.title or just key in parts.title.cshtml, we should find the original template. And here it is. This is the original template, the original shape template that renders the title, the parts_title shape. As you can see, again, this is Razor. It contains now a bit more code than what we have seen before. We will debug what this does, but first let's copy this content over to our override here. And let's also add something still here, so you can see that actually our override is working. Oops. Okay, let's refresh and let's see whether this still works. It indeed works. Let's also open shape tracing and see what actually changed here. And if we take a look at this window, yeah, we see that now the active template is actually our template. But still we can see that the original one that we have overridden comes from the Orchard core. And now that we have copied over this piece of Razor code, let's take a moment to actually understand it. What we have here, well, first is an assignment, and the right-hand side refers to some model. Well, in every template there is a model object. The model object is the view model, and in the case of shape templates, it's actually the shape object that well contains or should contain every piece of data that the templates may need. So in the case of the title part, well, what we have is the title. So that's also in the model. What we do here is that we assign this title to the layout title, because there is also a thing called the layout shape. We will get to that in a minute. And we also display the title in an H1 element. So, well, just to have the title of that content item displayed in a section. Let's take a look at all of this from the debugger as well. So I will just put a breakpoint here and attach the debugger. And Benedek doesn't have attached to anything installed. Shame. So what we could do is, well, we could go to debug, debug and attach the process, and find the ISExpress process here, which is, well, under ISExpress.exe, and just hit attach. But we can do all this better with Visual Studio extension. Alright, now that the debugger is loaded, let's refresh the site again. And our breakpoint is hit. So now we are we are debugging the templates, and we can see a bit behind of all of these objects that we have discovered here. So let's see what's in here. So again, we have this model object, and inside that model object, what do we have? Well, there are actually a lot more properties than just title, but title is also here with welcome to Orchard. Oops. Well, let's try it from the locals window rather. So, back to the model. We actually have a lot of more stuff here than just the title, which not very surprisingly contains the welcome to Orchard text, so that's good. But there are also some other properties. For example, well, we have a classes and an ID property. Both would refer to HTML attributes similarly, so HTML or CSS classes and an HTML ID. The items collection could contain child shapes. So remember that we have a tree of shapes, a hierarchy where shapes can contain other shapes. Now, if the title shape would contain other shapes, it would be in this items collection. Or it can be also in other custom properties, but this is the default one. And we also have two properties, content part and content item. For every shape that is tied to a content part, like the parts underscore shape is tied to the content part title, there will be a content part and a content item property automatically added. Now you may have guessed that, well, these contain the content part and the content item object respectively. So this content part property, for example, contains the title part object. Now with these notions and with these details, we are getting a bit into how content items work in code. And once we will create our own content parts and also own content types from code, we will see the details of all of these.